Student growth percentiles are one of the main metrics used to determine school effectiveness. The Department of Assessment and Accountability within Utah's State Office of Education has made this video to guide stakeholders into better understanding this important metric. Let's look at an example. Last year, Anthony was a third grader who took the statewide math test and had a scale score of 290. Looking at the cut scores for third grade math, a score of 290 is considered to be level 1, or below proficient. In a closer look, we see that Anthony's score of 290 is at the lower end of the scores. Had Anthony scored between 297 and 316, he would have been considered a level 2, or approaching proficient. A student who receives a proficiency level of a 3 or 4 is considered to be proficient. In addition to knowing whether or not a student was proficient, a student's growth in ability from year to year is also helpful information for instruction. In the following year, Anthony completed his fourth grade math test and scored a 340. According to the cut scores for the fourth grade test, Anthony is considered a level 2, or approaching proficient. Utah's math assessments are vertically scaled. However, we are not able to simply subtract the current score of 340 from the previous score of 290 to measure growth, because the difference of 50 points doesn't tell us if Anthony's growth was below average, average, or higher than average. So, how do we know how much Anthony grew last year? Last year, all Utah third graders took the same math test as Anthony. If you recall, Anthony scored a 290 on the test. We then take other third grade students around the state who scored similarly to Anthony and create a comparison group. Comparison groups are determined solely on their assessment scores. Other demographics of students are not taken into account, such as English language proficiency, special education status, ethnicity, or free or reduced lunch status. What we want to know is, relative to his comparison group, how much did Anthony's math ability grow in the past year? Here you can see that overall, Anthony's comparison group performed lower than the state average. The highest performing students in Anthony's comparison group barely made proficiency. Recall that Anthony scored a 340 on his fourth grade math assessment. Analyzing the data more closely, we see that Anthony performed better than 80% of his comparison group. This 80% translates to a student growth percentile of 80. In Utah's state accountability system, an SGP of 40 or higher is considered to have made sufficient growth. In Anthony's case, his SGP of 80 is considered high growth. Now let's look at a few other students in Anthony's class. Here you see that students in Anthony's classroom received different scores on the math assessment in third and fourth grade. Each student has their own comparison group based on previous assessment scores. And depending on a student's performance relative to their statewide comparison group performance, each student receives an SGP between 1 and 99. Note that high proficiency does not necessarily mean high growth, and vice versa. For example, this student's scores gave him a proficiency of 4 both years, but his SGP is only 2. Which tells us that he performed better than 2% of his comparison group, even though he was highly proficient in both years. Students with the same score can have different SGPs. For example, both Anthony and his classmate received a 340 on the fourth grade math assessment, but because they were in different comparison groups based on past performance, their SGPs are different. Also note that students with the same SGP can have very different scores. SGPs not only show how individual students are progressing, but they also can be aggregated to show how schools and districts are performing. How can we determine a school or classroom's performance based on individual students' SGP? We can use the median growth percentile, or MGP, for estimating the growth of students within a school or a classroom. Anthony is one of 19 students who attends Mr. Lyman's fourth grade classroom. In order to calculate an MGP, we first rank each student in order of their individual SGP. Median means middle, so we take the middle SGP, and that becomes the classroom MGP. In this case, the MGP for Mr. Lyman's classroom is 55. For more information regarding SGPs and MGPs and how they are used in Utah's accountability systems, please review Utah's Accountability Technical Manual found here, or contact the Department of Assessment and Accountability.